Welcome to Cloudscapes, your go-to podcast for all things cloud native. Our aim here is to keep it real and have down-to-earth chats about the cloud to also help you learn something new and be inspired on your cloud journey. My name is Teppo Suominen. I'm your host and a team coach here at UpCloud. And with me, as always, is my co-host Jannika Jokinen, a senior account executive here at UpCloud as well. And joining us today, I am happy to welcome with us from Pionative, our guest Hijmen Fokker, who is a co-founder at Pionative. So let's start with getting to know you and Pionative a bit. What does the company do and what do you do? What's your role there as a co-founder?
Yeah, first of all, really happy to be here. What we do at Pionative is, so we focus on Kubernetes and cloud, cloud surrounding infrastructure. And what we do at Pionative is we help clients that develop software and develop that software on top of Kubernetes. We help them to develop that software more efficiently by providing the Kubernetes platform for them. So in essence, we build and maintain Kubernetes platforms, which sounds really easy, but we are a platform development team, and we use a standardized architecture for that. So that's what differentiates us from other companies as well. What you see a lot in the market is that companies that use Kubernetes or that build Kubernetes, they build it from scratch. They reinvent the wheel. They hire someone who does it. They'll take months and months and months. And then we use a standardized architecture that works for 95% of companies. So we don't help enterprise, really big enterprise companies. They can afford an entire team who will do it custom
exactly.
For
make
themselves.
It fit for their purpose.
Exactly. So the other 95% of companies that are a bit smaller but still need to use Kubernetes and don't need a dedicated team, that's what we help them with our stack.
Brilliant. Yeah. All right, and that's basically what we will be focusing quite a lot here today is exactly Kubernetes, how that works, what's going on in the Kubernetes ecosystem as well, and of course what you guys do there and how you can help, and what are the things that one should be considerate of when taking Kubernetes into use or extending it or moving especially from different platforms towards Kubernetes, which is the direction a lot of companies are going nowadays. Well, Kubernetes itself, the technology, why is it important and what is it all about at the end of the day, from your point of view?
Yeah, so Kubernetes has gotten quite a hype, right?
Yes. Finally.
I think we need to first of all get a step back and look at containerization.
Yes.
So Kubernetes itself is, of course, a really big platform with a lot of functionality, but the containerization part of it started a little bit before that. So companies were finding out, developers were finding out that running software in a container is the new way to run your software. You can run your container in a cloud environment, you can run it in a private cloud environment, but also in a public cloud environment, even on your own laptop, and that really helps with both application development, but also vendor lock-in. And vendor lock-in, I think, is one of the biggest, one big reason why companies choose for containers, but also why companies choose for Kubernetes. So Kubernetes came out later because when you're managing many containers, you will still have a vendor lock-in on architectural level, which means that you can run 10 containers in a public cloud environment, but the monitoring, the logging, security, the environment handling, all that is then taken care of by your cloud provider. And if you want to move out of that cloud provider to another provider, or to your on-premise environment, for example, you cannot. So you have to redo your whole architecture. And with Kubernetes, you can maintain and you can set up your entire architecture within one cloud environment and move that whole architecture to another cloud environment, which not completely, but mostly eliminates the vendor lock-in aspect. Of course, there's a lot of other reasons for Kubernetes. Yeah. So one of those is scalability.
Yes.
If you want to scale your applications up and down really easily, Kubernetes is a really good tool for that. And there are other advantages of Kubernetes, of course.
Of course, yeah. From like an engineering perspective, the age-old runs on my machine is finally solved with containers and especially Kubernetes, because now you just actually ship your machine. So we're finally there.
Exactly. I've had it myself too. When I was running one container on one machine and then another, or one application on one machine, another developer had to run an entire manual of 30 pages to get the application installed on his machine. And that 30 page is now automated using container technology. That we call infrastructure as code. So what you do with containers, you set up a Docker file, and that Docker file describes everything that is related to your application, but also the everything your application needs, so all the libraries it needs, etc. And that makes it really convenient to run your applications. Yeah.
And you've got this set up so that it works for, like you said, 95% of cases, basically.
Yeah, so what we do at Pionative is we have set up a standardized architecture, which works for 95% of companies. What you find is that there's a CNCF landscape, and the CNCF landscape has, I think, about 1,000 technologies that are open source, really great. But when companies are starting with Kubernetes, they have to think about which of these 1,000 technologies am I going to use. Yeah. And when you have a particular cloud setup, you can just use the cloud best practices. But when you run Kubernetes, you have to trust the ecosystem or trust the community which solution is the best. And finding out which architecture to use is really complex. You will need expertise for that. Yeah. You will need people for that. Those people are very scarce, hard to find, or really expensive. one of the two. Yeah. And what we have done at Pionative, we have set up an architecture that most companies can use. We even share it online. Send me a message if you want to, if you want to get the architecture for yourself. But that architecture works for 90% of cases, and we help a lot of clients with that, and it works fantastically. So that's the reason why we chose for a standardized architecture. And of course, some companies are sometimes more focused on performance. Some companies are more focused on security, for example, for financial sectors or other sectors. So it's not entirely the same thing, every single architecture, but they are really similar. And especially the first initial implementation of Kubernetes and then the maintenance of all those components is a big hassle to implement.
Yeah, and I think that's also quite interesting if thinking about that. I talk with a lot of different people from different companies, and they're nowadays more or less always saying that, hey, we use Kubernetes. Can you help with that? Or like, can we use your Kubernetes, and how should we set it up the best way, and so forth. And or if it's like not that cloud native company yet, they might be thinking that, okay, we want to use Kubernetes in the future. How should we do that? And it sounds great that then you've kind of made it easier for companies to then either start using Kubernetes or then enhance their current Kubernetes usage.
Exactly, and we share a lot in the community as well at Pionative, and we get a lot of feedback from that. That's what we learn from sometimes. So for one example, is Elasticsearch, which is a centralized logging solution that everybody used 10 years ago. People still use it; still has a valid use case, but it's very heavy. So what you see in the last few years, you see a shift to Grafana Loki, which is more lightweight. For smaller companies, it has sometimes a better performance. It's cheaper to use, and that shift is a community shift that we are continuously navigating and making sure that we follow the right approaches. And that's why our architecture is also a living architecture. That's why we swapped Elasticsearch for Grafana Loki a few years back, and it's nice to be always, at least we try to be always on top of the newest innovations, but also think about what is stable and make sure that applications don't crash all the time by using the newest technologies. Yeah.
Now that's the, I think, blessing and curse of working in a large-scale open source community, because you get a lot of options, but then you need to have the expertise that you guys luckily have that other people can then leverage to know which of those solutions are usable and also which are moving forward, because sometimes you also in the open source community get those forks that kind of never go anywhere, or then that become way too heavyweight and robust for the use cases you're looking for. So that is something that I think, like from my perspective, would be really useful when working with you guys, is to have someone with the time and expertise to have a look at, like, hey, these are the things that really work for these use cases. You want to go this direction.
Exactly.
Like a guide on the tour there.
And what you also see is you see managed platforms pop up. So companies choose for Kubernetes. One of the reasons they choose for Kubernetes is because of its open ecosystem, its open architecture, and making sure there is no vendor lock-in. So we've all seen what happened with Oracle. A lot of companies are still using Oracle because they just cannot get rid of it. And in the modern technology landscape, people are trying, or at least a lot of companies are moving to Kubernetes because of its vendor lock-in reasons, and that really helps. And you see a lot of companies also starting up managed Kubernetes offerings in their own cloud environment, in the cloud environment of that vendor, which create an additional lock-in. So what we do is we work with our clients, our software development clients, and we work in their cloud environment using their code, making sure that they get their solution in place.
All right. You mentioned earlier that Kubernetes came in a bit later into the containerization picture, and of course, even Kubernetes is now 10 years old, so we've gone quite a ways from the start of it. Looking at the last 10 years, what are the indications or expectations? Like, where will we be moving next? What are the next steps from your perspective?
Yeah, so from a technical standpoint, let's diving a little bit deeper into Kubernetes. What you see happening for the last 10 years, I actually started with Kubernetes about 9 years ago, so straight from the beginning. There were so little tools available, so little applications that you could use. What you see happening is that, as I mentioned, there's 1,000 different technologies that are all great within the CNCF landscape. They all run on top of Kubernetes, and they are getting really, really mature. And what you see happening is that Kubernetes gets abstracted away more and more and more. So what happens at the underlying level of Kubernetes, you won't know what is happening anymore. And that's a good thing. It's also a risky thing. It should be stable, and because if something doesn't work and you have to fix it, it's too complex to fix because nobody knows what is.
If you're working on like level 3 of abstraction and we break down on the core level there, it's hard to dive in.
Exactly, and that is why the community is working really hard to make sure that the Kubernetes layer is stable, redundant, high available, etc. And they have done a really good job. So Kubernetes is very stable, and what you see happening in the last few years is you see more and more Kubernetes operators pop up. For example, database operators that manage the whole life cycle of that database on top of Kubernetes. Yeah. So you won't have to think about upgrading your Postgres instance anymore. You can use your Postgres operator to upgrade your Postgres database. And that makes it a lot easier to use Kubernetes. And I think that will happen more and more and more. For example, your monitoring stack is usually Prometheus. It's a click and install and you have your monitoring stack. And it will more and more be abstracted away. That's my vision for Kubernetes. And then in the end, you will just run your container on top of an open source ecosystem that you don't really understand, but you will know it works because everybody uses it, and the community will maintain that infrastructure for you.
So are we actually looking at kind of a deviation point in Kubernetes where you will get the kind of consumer and developer experiences separated in a sense that the community will be in charge of making sure that Kubernetes works and goes forward, while for the end user, end customer, it'll usually be just a point and click interface. You just want a Kubernetes, please.
I think that's a good point. I think you'll have 3 different parties. So the first party is the open source community that develops the platforms like Kubernetes itself, but also the monitoring components, the centralized logging components. You'll have so many components. I think that will be one part of the market that will be standardized more and more and more. The second group of people, I think, will be the platform developers that will integrate all those together and can work separately from the first group. So they will have their own life cycle, they will have their own development teams, etc. And then the third group of people will be the developers that only use Kubernetes. Yeah. And that's what we see with our clients. So we are platform engineers. We develop the platform, and we make sure that if one of our clients, which is a developer, deploys something on top of Kubernetes, we will make sure that it works, that it will deploy. Yeah. And if something fails on that lower end of the stack, we will fix it. Yeah. and then the developers are responsible for their own applications. So, for example, in a transport company, they will make sure that their trucks keep driving, or they will make sure that their app is still running. But they will use the underlying technologies that we provide for them. And that's how you can really do platform engineering, which is a term in itself as well.
Yes.
Have a platform team and a development team, which are separated from each other, which gives a really big advantage of focus, because you want your developers to focus as much as possible. And if your developers focus, you'll have more innovation, you'll have a better product.
Yeah, and if they have to keep on looking at like, why isn't my Kubernetes instance working, then that's where their focus will go, and not the product you're actually trying to create on top of it.
And what you see a lot happening as well in the at companies we go to is that the lead engineer of that development company often sets up the Kubernetes stack. So when a development company switches to Kubernetes or migrates to Kubernetes, you will see that the lead engineer, which is the most valuable developer in the team, will lose all his focus on the product, will move all his focus to Kubernetes because it's interesting, and of course he will love the job. But it comes with a big cost. So not only the cost of the salary, which might be high for your lead developer, but also the cost of the focus that he or she loses, that they cannot focus on developing the product anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that, if you actually need to spend your time on something that is not at the core of your business, but whereas it's like actually enabling you to actually have that software or application, for your customers, but then it's like, okay, but I don't actually have the time to maintain the Kubernetes, for example, so then you can be there to help and support. And therefore, I think it's quite nice to work together on those kind of use cases as well, when it's like, okay, we have the infrastructure for companies, but then they actually need support and help how to set up their Kubernetes the correct way, and actually take that part of the job that they can then focus on actually developing the application itself and delivering that to their end customers the best way.
Exactly. Because what you are doing is, as a cloud provider, is you're abstracting away the Kubernetes complexity itself, which is a movement that started. So I think 8 years ago, everyone was managing their own Kubernetes infrastructure, which is crazy if you think about it now, because there is so much going on at the Kubernetes level.
This is funny to me because I was part of a startup that we had a great product idea, and we spent the whole of 2017 building a Kubernetes architecture that we could run that great idea. We never got the idea off the ground because we were doing exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, I've built my own Kubernetes clusters as well, and there's a use case for that too. So some enterprises or some companies that need to have their own hardware, for example, they need to run their own infrastructure. But these days you will have tools like RKE, Rancher Kubernetes Engine, that will make even that process very easy. In the older days, you had kubeadm to install Kubernetes, which is really, I've done it, but it's no fun.
It is hard work for sure.
Yeah, and you're abstracting that away. So that's what I believe will only happen more and more. So now you're abstracting away the managed Kubernetes layer, so you don't have to think about adding nodes to your cluster. It will just auto-scale. Or you don't have to think about if the API server doesn't crash because it's managed by another party, or your etcd database needs to be back up somewhere. In a cloud environment, you don't think about that. And that's one abstraction away. The other abstraction is that what we are doing, and that is making sure that the platform components itself are also not a concern anymore. And that is what still a lot of companies are managing that themselves. Yeah. And I think there's a really big thing to win for companies in terms of cost, time, and resources. Yeah,
for sure.
And I think also, as you explained, you've been seeing different types of setups and ways of using Kubernetes, and also when then customer is talking to you, you can get that kind of advice to them that, hey, you're now doing this. Have you thought about this? We've also seen, companies doing this, and then they got these kind of benefits, like in cost savings and all those kind of things. So I think from that perspective, it's also quite interesting to hear all about this experience and expertise that you have in the field with Kubernetes.
Yeah.
We promised we would keep it quite non-technical, but we're going to dive in a bit anyway. So you've mentioned a lot about the abstraction layers and the Kubernetes moving to a more abstracted level, but then under the hood, the Kubernetes is developing quite a bit and moving forward at quite a pace. What's the direction and what core skills are necessary if you want to be successful with Kubernetes?
I believe the most important skill forward is to be able to use Kubernetes and not being able to administer Kubernetes. And what I mean by that is, I think you have two main certificates, the Kubernetes CK8s and the CK8s, which is the Kubernetes administrator or the Kubernetes application developer. The Kubernetes administrator side, I believe, will be less and less and less needed in the field because that is being automated away. Cloud providers are taking care of that. And it's more of a platform engineering job that you will need. So you won't need, in managed cloud environments, you won't need to do a manual reboot of your nodes, for example, whenever you are scaling up and down your application. Those kind of things can be, are abstracted away, I believe. What you should focus on, and it depends a little bit on the role, of course, but as a company developing software for Kubernetes or on top of Kubernetes, what you should be focusing on, I believe, is the application developer side of things. So how do I set up my resources in Kubernetes? How do I set up a good load balancer approach? How do I integrate my components with an Nginx, for example? Those are the things that I would be focusing on. And that is something we already do for our clients, so they can really focus on the application development.
Right, yeah.
And with application development, I say application development because from my perspective, it's application development, but it's not really application development. It's defining your application to run in Kubernetes using a certain way. Yeah. And an example of that is defining your replicas for your application, thinking about pod disruption budgets, making sure that whenever one node crashes, you'll have another replica available. Making sure that whenever one region or one zone crashes in a cloud environment, and you cannot reach that zone anymore, that you'll have a zone redundant setup for your application. Those kind of things are really important to think about. And it's less important to think about how Kubernetes itself works under the hood.
So it's more about actually understanding the way a Kubernetes infrastructure runs and less about understanding the Kubernetes itself. So you need to kind of have some cloud understanding and then be able to leverage that into your use case.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then if think about, a customer and they're thinking that, okay, we use Kubernetes, or we're thinking that we should use Kubernetes, and they're actually debating that, is that the way to go for them? And then they contact you and ask for guidance. How do you then help those customers understanding whether Kubernetes is a way to go for them, even though it's being, really popular in the market?
Yeah. So the fact that Kubernetes is a hype is also dangerous. So I've talked to quite some people who want to run Kubernetes but shouldn't. So Kubernetes is a great use case for a lot of scenarios, but there's also a lot of scenarios where you should not use Kubernetes at all, because of the example that you mentioned. You're working for a year on something and then you don't release it.
Exactly.
I've also seen companies running WordPress websites on Kubernetes, which is crazy if you think about it, because there's managed WordPress services for $10 a month that you can just run your WordPress website on. So the fact that an engineer likes to use Kubernetes and installs it for a website is crazy. So what I usually take as a measurement, if you have 3 or 4 containers or 3 or 4 applications that need to talk to each other, that is a good starting point to think about, do I want to use Kubernetes? Because the problems that Kubernetes solves are only important when you have a relatively complex setup. If you only run a website, it's not relatively complex, it's very simple. The code might be complex, but the deployment architecture is fairly simple. And in that case, you should just use something else, a managed service in Azure maybe, or managed service in another cloud provider. But when you want an open architecture, or when you want to scale, for example, that's one use case for Kubernetes. So let's say I'm now running 15 containers, and I believe my business is growing by 200% every single month, I might have 200 containers after a year. That is really a scalable setup. Yeah. And in that case, it's really interesting to think about what problems can Kubernetes solve for me. Because if you use managed services in one of the 3 big cloud providers, for example, you will generate or you will create a vendor login because your architecture, and with architecture I mean your centralized logging, your centralized monitoring system, that can all be done in a big cloud vendor, for example, but making sure that is ready for the future and open source is, I think, a big reason to choose for Kubernetes.
If one is adopting Kubernetes, then when is it the right choice? Like you've given a few examples, but like if just looking from point of view, like here were the pitfalls when you shouldn't, but what about like when should you? When are you?
So if you want a really scalable and open architecture, scalability is one thing that Kubernetes is really good at, as in the best solution. You can do, I don't know, AWS Lambda, for example, which will also scale, but it will be really pricey.
Yes.
So for
slow compared as well, usually.
And it can be really slow as well. You'll have some limitations. So I think there's not one single reason to choose for Kubernetes, because other solutions might also scale, and AWS Lambda can be a better choice sometimes, depending on the application type. But it's a different set of factors that will decide whether Kubernetes is a good fit for you. But one reason to not choose for Kubernetes yet, when your question is when is the right time, is your application ready for it? And that is an important one, because your application should be relatively modern to be able to run smoothly on Kubernetes. Right. So if you want to use the power of Kubernetes as it's meant to be with the scalability features, you need to make sure that your application can crash at any time without the user without the user seeing it. Yeah. And that is why, for example, your application should be able to run more than one replica. And if you have a big monolith with a database attached and the monolith has internal state, you cannot do that. So it is the right time to think about Kubernetes whenever your application is ready for it.
Yeah. You mentioned state. This is something I've asked a few other people in my time. I get varying answers. Do you feel that statelessness is a necessity or just a good thing to have if you're moving towards Kubernetes?
That depends on the architecture again. Okay. What I mean by that is
good answer.
It always depends, right?
Yes.
What I mean by that, stateless is always better than stateful, or always easier to manage than stateful. Yes. But there is no single business without state. So you will have to manage state somewhere. Yeah. And managing state in Kubernetes is complex. So that's just, if you want to manage state within Kubernetes, it's more complex than using a service, for example, that manages everything for you.
Exactly, yeah.
But there are scenarios for it. So what we have seen in the last few years is that because of those operators, it has been easier to manage state like Postgres databases or Kafka, for example, on top of Kubernetes. But when you do that, make sure that you have a good disaster recovery strategy. Make sure that you have redundancy, because data is your most valuable asset as a business. Yeah. So make sure it's safe, and you test your disaster recovery strategy every single year, or maybe twice or 3 or 4 times a year, to make sure that your backup and restore procedures are working as they should. Because I've also seen databases that were not backed up, and companies didn't realize it. It's easy to go bad. Yeah.
Yeah, and like with Kafka, an excellent tool, but if you're not sure what you're doing, you can end up in situations like I've seen a company who basically used their Kafka queue for all of the states without realizing that it actually empties after a certain time period, at which point like they had their oldest states just disappear, and it was like, oh, well, like what's happened now? And well, they're not recoverable if Kafka loses them. So
exactly,
then, you need to be aware of where those things are going. Well, with Kubernetes, then of course you've seen it all, helping the customer probably. What are the most common pitfalls when you're adopting Kubernetes, and how should one go about avoiding those if you're trying to grab up Kubernetes for yourself?
Yeah, I think the biggest pitfall is to reinvent the wheel. Because innovation is going so fast within the Kubernetes landscape that it's really easy to miss something that's already there. And for example, is using an existing architecture that someone else has built, like we have done. So we have an architectural document that describes the choices that we have made and why we have made those. At least start with something that is already there. Don't build something yourself until you know for sure that someone else hasn't built it already. And I think that's one pitfall. What are other pitfalls? I think one of the biggest pitfalls for organizations that implement Kubernetes is that the lead developer, like I mentioned, that the lead developer is doing the work, which will cost you focus. And I think the focus cost is something that is not accounted for in a lot of scenarios.
It is easy to forget in engineering that someone's time is not going into what it should be, because it's it's one of those things that unless you focus on looking at where people are spending their time, it's easy to think, they're working on the product because Kubernetes is now part of our product, and then it's on top of it or below it actually in this case, but
exactly.
It's not the product itself. It's just a tool that the product is running on.
Yeah, and Kubernetes itself is just sort of an operating system of the cloud, as some people call it. So in itself, it has value, but it has even more value because of all the integrations that you can put on top of it. So whenever you have a Kubernetes architecture, you will have at least 25 components running inside your cluster that are not even your application. So your application sits next to those 25 components. Yeah. And those 25 components are necessary to implement, but also take a lot of time to implement. And if you can learn from others what they have done, it's way better to just copy and paste.
Like never try to reinvent the wheel, as you put quite well.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, then we'll move to our finishing set. We've got a set of few quick questions. You can answer these in a single sentence or a few words if you'd like to. But
I'll be quick.
Yes, be kind of what comes to the top of the head, and don't overthink it too much. So starting off, we've discussed Kubernetes, so we'll try to not focus on that so much, but you can pick in there as well. But what is the cloud trend you see currently emerging in Europe that interests you the most?
In Europe, it's, I think, the GDPR regulations.
Especially like from the cloud perspective and how they will affect the landscape.
Yeah, I think we've seen some clients as well that have a really hard requirement that data should stay within Europe. Sure, For Dutch companies, sometimes they say it should stay within the Netherlands.
We actually have the same in Finland as well, that there are situations where it cannot leave the country.
Yeah, and it can even go a step further, as in it should be in the Netherlands. But I think that's the main cloud trend that I see popping up. So I see popping up more cloud vendors also working on managed Kubernetes services within the EU. So you've seen it as a start that Azure, GCP, and AWS were the first three cloud providers to support Kubernetes as a managed service, which is great because you don't have to maintain it yourself. Yes. But as the European laws change and get more strict, companies are really thinking about leaving their data within the country that the person that the data relates to is living in. And for those use cases, European cloud providers are an option. And also a requirement is that the cloud provider itself should not be situated in the US or outside of Europe. Yeah. And that's what I see more and more,
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, that's also one of the common points that we also help our customers with together. But then if thinking about when you're not navigating the cloud and the cloud industry overall, what would you say is your favorite place on earth? You can also pick your home.
My favorite place on earth. Well, home is a favorite place, but okay, my favorite place on earth will be Misty Cliffs Beach in South Africa.
All right.
Yeah, it's a kitesurf beach. I'm a kitesurf fan, and that's my.
Okay.
Whenever I'm there, is heaven.
Brilliant.
Yep.
I have to look it up. I can picture something, but I'm pretty sure I'm wrong. It sounds amazing. Well, we promised to skip the first two. So what is the experience? We've had book and movie there, but we'll focus on the experience this time around that has had a great impact on you.
Experience. I think I've been living in Australia for a year. Mm-hmm. That has been, we were talking about it during lunch already today, but it had a big impact on my life. So I've lived in Australia for a year, which is really interesting. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I can imagine. I always see, news about spiders and everything, and that's like the first thing I think about Australia. But
it's probably quite a bit more.
I've seen them all. Yeah, I've seen spiders, snakes, crocs, sharks.
Wow.
Oh,
yeah.
But yeah, definitely on my traveling list, I would like to go there as well. I will ask you for recommendations.
Sure, feel free.
Then one last question for you. We covered quite a lot today and a lot about Kubernetes and the importance of it and when you should or you shouldn't use Kubernetes and how you can help companies to actually determine how they should use Kubernetes and if they should use Kubernetes. But if we think about one thing that you wish people would take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Depends a little bit on the type of people, of course. If it's aimed towards companies that develop software, I would say if you get started with Kubernetes, at least consult an expert to navigate the way a little bit, because there are really a lot of dangers in implementing Kubernetes and failing. There's a lot of companies that fail to implement Kubernetes because it takes too much time, or because, again, the focus point of your lead developer is a big thing. So what I would say is consult an expert.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be for a complete project, but at least to guide you which decisions you should make or what you should think about. Yeah.
Perfect. Following up from there, we're wrapping up here. So what we've gone through is kind of the situation of Kubernetes, where we are right now and where we are going, and of course where we've come from, how Kubernetes is evolving and developing more towards the abstract layers and what that will mean for those who work with Kubernetes like you guys or us as well. And especially, of course, those people who work on top of Kubernetes and how they will need to focus less on the Kubernetes part and more on what they build and bring into the Kubernetes ecosystem. And I think the key takeaway, you put it quite fine here, but don't figure it out yourself. Ask for help. Look for solutions that have been done before. Find the solutions that already work. And only then recreate it if there is no way of getting it from somewhere else and getting the help.
And I think the community is also a great place to start.
Exactly.
So the cloud native community is really a great community to live in and to ask questions. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, I personally love the open source community in its like diversity and the amount of ideas just roll around there. But it is great to see like people that are absolutely like they're living and breathing the stuff they do. It's their life, and it's just amazing to see how enthusiastic and in there they are, and they want to make it happen. One final question, maybe. If someone is implementing Kubernetes and they need help, what's the best way to get in touch? Just ask for the architecture from you guys. And
sure, send me a message on LinkedIn. My name will probably be somewhere at the title of this video.
Yes.
I'll send you the architecture document, no problem there. And please get in touch. We can always chat, always have a call.
Brilliant.
I'm really open to talking to anyone.
Thank you so much, Hijmen, for your time today. It's been an absolutely great, interesting talk on what you guys do and what's going on in the Kubernetes ecosystem.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.